Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 113 of the Feeling Good podcast. Today we have another Ask David. We're getting more and more questions. We're going to have longer and longer Ask Davids to field all those questions. But
we appreciate your questions.
We do appreciate the questions, and they also help us come up with topics for new episodes. So Please keep them coming. So we got here something from Stephen, who said, thank you and Fabrice and special guests for your wonderful podcasts. I'm wondering what advice you have for people who are interested in going into therapy. And he means by that becoming a therapist, I think. Specifically TEAM therapy. I see the Feeling Good Institute has referrals to people with PsyDs, PhDs, and LCSW degrees, among others. Obviously, there are many avenues into mental health. Any specific advice on entering the field of mental health for those with an interest in TEAM?
Okay, well, I'll throw some ideas out there, and you may have some ideas to throw out there as well, Fabrice. Let me just say that of the people who come for TEAM therapy to my free weekly Stanford training group for community therapists, those who are PhDs in clinical psychology tend to learn the most quickly and have the best training, the best discipline training, and that would probably go for PsyD students as well.
Yeah, it's a similar kind of training.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you want to do therapy and become a TEAM therapist, any route that you have for getting licensed to do counseling will be sufficient, because you can have fancy degrees and not be very skillful as a therapist, and you can have the most humble degree and be tremendously skillful. We have people at all degrees in my Tuesday training group, but I don't even list their degrees on the attendance list. We just call each other by first name, and the only currency there is what skill level can you demonstrate, how much compassion, how effective are you in doing what you're doing. Now, one of our most successful therapists ever is Sunny Choi, who was a high-tech engineer. Because I think his parents thought he didn't have what it would take to do working with humans, or he got in this pigeonhole that all he was good for was math and equations. And a few years ago, he said, I don't want this high-tech career. I want to help people. And he got what was a fairly direct route, which was to get a LCSW, which I think takes 2 years. And licensed clinical social worker. And then he came to the Tuesday group because it was the only training he got in my Tuesday group, and coming on the Sunday hikes. But he learned how to do exactly what I do because he just copied what I do on the hikes. And he's fantastically effective. He's become like a healer, a miracle worker. And the simplest thing, some people now are just becoming coaches, and I don't think there's hardly ever any licensure requirements.
No, there isn't
for it. And I think the general public, they don't care, to be honest, what kind of degrees you have, because you can have a lot of degrees and just be a real boring intellectual person, but if you've got heart and you can heal people and the word gets around, you got all the referrals you want. That's my point of view.
Well, I sort of agree with you. I do think that certain clients, I know it's a small minority, but certain clients do care about what degree you have.
Sure.
And but I kind of looked back upon my own training, because like Sunny, I was a high-tech worker myself.
That's right.
And I chose to go the PhD route. in retrospect, I realized how many years of extra study that took me that did not bring an iota of expertise to what I do now.
Yeah.
And so I would say if you just want to do team therapy, like if you live in California, there's this relatively newer license called licensed professional counselor.
Oh yeah, there's a good one.
Which you can also do in a couple of years. And that will get you working quicker than probably any other avenue.
Yes. And then to learn how to become a team therapist, go to the feelinggoodinstitute.com.
Yeah.
And they've got all kinds of online trainings, 12-week introductory courses, and all kinds of workshops like the one I'm giving or did give, depending on when this thing comes out, with Jill, a one-day workshop on how to treat people with relationship problems. You can start learning this stuff right away. You don't have to wait till you get your degree. And one last icing on the cake. See, my counselor in high school, in college, told me to go to medical school. It was going to be so important to become a psychiatrist. Yeah. And I spent 5 years.
Well, back then, it was kind of true.
Yeah. Well, the idea is, I went to medical school, and the idea was all these biological factors that cause depression and anxiety, and only a doctor can understand them. And then I had to do 4 years of residency training after that, and I did 2 years of postdoctoral training after that. And tell you the truth, I never learned anything in medical school that helped me treat anybody. It was the same as you. Yeah. That it was, and I've never had any patients who were depressed that it was caused by biological factors. It was a hoax. So I spent a lot of wasted years there learning anatomy and, histology and biochemistry and all of these things that don't really have anything to do if someone has a broken marriage and they're not getting along with their spouse, or someone is feeling worthless and filled with self-criticisms. None of that stuff is going to my way of thinking at least, is going to be practically helpful.
Yeah. Next one is from Sandy, who says, what exercises do you recommend breaking perfectionist tendencies with, especially if they have been going on for 19 years? How can I push that red button so I can get rid of these values? It's interesting. She sees perfectionism as a value.
Yeah, that's the magic button that I talk about so often. Well, Sandy, I can tell you a couple things to do. One of them is read the chapter on perfectionism in my book, Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy. There's a lot of exercises to do there. And also, if Fabrice and others bug me, I wrote an article for Psychology Today magazine called The Perfectionist Script for Self-Defeat.
Oh, really?
And it was the most popular article in the history of Psychology Today magazine. And I don't think you can get it anymore. It came out in 1980, around the time I wrote it, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, to be honest, to promote my book, Feeling Good, and it became a cover feature and very, very popular. And Zane in the Tuesday group, I found an old copy of it, and he digitized it, and I think just scanned it or something, and he said he'd send me a copy of it. I could publish it on my website, The Perfectionist Script for Self-Defeat, so people could read that article.
Oh, that'd be great, because I looked on Psychology Today, and their back issues online only go back to 2003, so back 15 years.
Yeah. But I have some copies in the garage. I think I even have one copy of the original magazine, and it was so cool. They had a dartboard on the cover, with a dart right in the middle of it, and it's bleeding.
Yeah, they have some good graphics. Still to this day, their graphics are just fantastic.
Yes. Oh, one last thing. The idea, Sandy, again, your question is of a general type, and you might want to write back with a moment that you were upset with your perfectionistic tendencies, and do a daily mood log. What was going on? What were your emotions? What were your negative thoughts? And then Fabrice and I could revisit this in a future podcast. And one thing among others is we'd have to look at the motivational piece, because there's tremendous benefits in being perfectionistic, as well as a price to pay. I used to be, and still am at times, but not nearly so much, but I used to be very perfectionistic, and it drove me to pretty great achievement. But there was also a dark side to the thing.
So as long as the achievement is primary, you might still want to keep it. But so I want to add to this. This is true for any questions on specific problems that people send us. We want to know a situation where this manifests.
Right.
We probably would have been able to go into more details.
A lot more detail.
With Sandy about this if she had given us a particular situation.
Yeah, and if she writes back to us with a situation, we could have a whole podcast easily on all the ways to overcome perfectionism. Yeah. But we can only help people for one brief moment of your life. We can't help people in a general way, and that's why we need you to do a daily mood log and send it to me if it's a mood problem like depression or anxiety, or a relationship journal if it's a relationship problem. Like if you want help with a conflict in relationships, write down a specific moment that you had a conflict with someone. What did they say?
Yeah.
And what did you say next? And that's all I need, those two things, and then we can have a fabulous broadcast on that relationship issue.
Next question is from Rin.
Rin, how do you spell it?
R-I-N.
Rin, okay.
I have a question about the Burns depression checklist that I'd love to have answered on your podcast. As a layperson with quite some experience in depression, never thought I would mention that as a kind of qualification, I couldn't help but wonder why for sleeping, which is the item 19, and appetite, item 20, both not enough and decrease and too much and increase can indicate that you're depressed. But for interest in work and sex, items 16 and 20, only the loss of interest seems to count as a symptom. I'd love to hear more about that. I don't question the validity of the checklist, and I guess even if somebody exposes some sexaholism or workaholism as a symptom of their depression, they will score high enough on the other items.
Well, first of all, Ren, let me say that I totally love your question. I like people who think about things in a little bit of depth, and I've done a lot of work in psychometrics and scale development. The early Burns depression checklist was kind of based on the conventional wisdom or lack of wisdom about the symptoms of depression, and they used to say, "Oh, you're sleeping too much, or you're sleeping too little. That shows that you're depressed." Or you're eating too much, or you're eating too little, and that's a symptom of depression. And the bottom, and so I included those things dutifully on my early long depression checklist. My research and common sense and clinical evidence since that time has shown that those items shouldn't even be on a depression checklist, and to ask if an increase or a decrease is a symptom of depression is just not nonsensical thinking. But that's the way they used to define depression. So I thought, well, I'll put these on my checklist. Now I've boiled my depression checklist down to 5 symptoms, and those are the real symptoms of depression. And one is feeling sad or depressed, and the more you are, the more depressed you are. Feeling hopeless, feeling worthless, a loss of motivation, and a loss of pleasure or satisfaction in life. And once you've got those 5 symptoms, and they're all one way, they're not both ways. The more you have worthlessness, the more depressed you are. The more hopeless you are, the more depressed you are. Once you have those 5 items, you have a 95% accurate measure of depression. And you can complete the new Burns depression checklist in 15 seconds and score it and interpret it. And it's extremely accurate. I did a study at the Stanford Hospital of 178 newly admitted patients, and I looked at all of these so-called organic symptoms of depression, like too much sleep or too little sleep, or too much appetite or too little appetite, or a loss of interest in sex, or loss of interest, workaholic. And none of these things had any correlation at all with depression. They're just non-specific symptoms that anyone could have, and they don't belong on a depression test, and they should not be felt. They are not valid symptoms of depression. They shouldn't be included in the DSM as symptoms of major depression or any other type of depression.
Well, let me be a little bit technical on this, and that's my perfectionist side.
Good. And your high-tech side.
That perhaps, yeah. So I'm looking at the DSM criteria right now for a major depressive disorder, which is what depression is called on the DSM.
Yeah.
And before listing what they are, after all, depression is just a definition. If I say it is X, then it is X.
That's right.
And if you say it is Y, we're just not speaking the same language.
That's right.
So
it's not a thing. It's just a way of categorizing certain feelings.
So the DSM originally was invented so that clinicians could have the same language.
For research, especially.
Yeah, especially for research. So when I say X, and you can go look in the dictionary and you look at X, oh, that's what you mean. Okay, so I get it.
Yeah.
So now we sort of have integrated the definitions in the DSM. And so for major depressive disorder, it happens to say that on criteria number 4, insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says so. That must be a criteria for depression.
Especially if you think the DSM is a non-psychotic manuscript.
Well, we're not going to go into criticizing the DSM right now.
Okay.
We can have an episode on this. But the criteria number 3 is significant weight loss when not dieting, or weight gain.
Yeah, exactly.
Or decrease or increase in appetite nearly every day.
Yeah.
So that's what the DSM says.
Yeah.
Hence, if you want a checklist that mirrors the DSM, you're going to have to put those items in there.
That's right. And the problem in the DSM is poorly thought out. It's bizarre. It's Alice in Wonderland. Thank you.
A little bit. We should probably do an episode on
Sure,
this.
let's do an episode on DSM it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So the title of our podcast is Do Mental Disorders Exist? Thomas Saw's made his reputation on that theme, and we can certainly reawaken some controversy around that theme.
We can, yeah. Well, we wouldn't be the first ones, for sure. And, criteria number 2, which is what Rin was referring to, is markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities, which could include work and sex.
Yeah.
But there's no increase in this particular criteria.
Yeah. A decreased ability to enjoy pleasurable activities. Yeah. That's one of the 5 on the Burns depression checklist, the new reduced thing. And that is a valid symptom of depression.
And that's what we refer to as anhedonia.
Yeah.
I cannot find any pleasure.
It's always good to use a big word when a small word will suffice, because if you use a big word, it makes it seem like you know something when you don't.
I guess anhedonia is shorter than loss of pleasure in life.
Well, that's true.
Only one word instead of 5.
True. That's true.
Here's the next one from Kevin. Kevin says, simple question. I am a therapist. How do I get over my desire to help? That's an easy one.
Well, yes. Fabrice will now reveal
become an insurance salesman.
One of the core aspects of team therapy is helping therapists not help patients. Rushing in to try to help patients is the cause of virtually almost all, say 95% of therapeutic failure. And instead, we look at all the reasons not to change and become the voice of the patient's resistance and do what we call sitting with open hands, rather than trying to sell the patient on change. Trying to help the patient, try to save the patient, trying to rescue the patient causes the patient to resist. Now, the question is how to get over it. It's a profound philosophical decision that you have to make. The first few years of my practice, I was going to save everybody, whether they want to be saved or not. I was going to rescue everyone. I was going to help everyone. I was into this helping addiction, and my ego was based on that. And I wouldn't have wanted to let go of it. I was going to help everyone, whether they wanted help or not. And then at a certain point, I got over that, and that led to team therapy, which is so much more powerful. But one thing we do, and that my wife Melanie has said to do, a lot of therapists can't learn team therapy, and my wife thinks it's because they don't want to, rather than they don't have the intellectual capacity to. And one of the things is maybe you could make a list, Kevin, of all the reasons to try to help and rescue your patients. And then after you've listed 5 or 10 or 15 really good reasons to keep trying to save and rescue people, you could ask yourself, why would I want to give that up? Is that something you want to give up? For example, I was doing a workshop, and I used to ask a trick question to make a point. I don't do that anymore because it shocks people too much, but I used to ask in my anxiety disorders workshop on day 2 to see if they'd learned what I was trying to teach on day 1. What is the most effective technique for obsessive compulsive disorder? And then they all raise their hand and they say exposure and response prevention. Mm-hmm. And then I say that's the biggest, most common error in all of psychotherapy, taking a diagnosis and then pushing techniques on a patient.
Yeah.
And I said, if someone has a diagnosis of OCD, they'll have at least 10 other diagnoses. And the question is, what do they want help with? Maybe they want help with their relationship with their son. But if you start pushing, it's your job to save them from OCD, that causes therapeutic failure. But I remember once a therapist rushed out of the workshop, demanded a refund, and refused any further dialogue. She was so offended by this because she was specializing in exposure and response prevention for OCD. But it's really a decision that you have to make. And see, I used to feel, boy, if you've got problem X, it's my job to save you. And it's been such a relief not to have given that up.
Well, one thing I may add to this is that, and this is true in any kind of impulse we have, is to look at the selfishness or the self-centeredness of the impulse.
Yes.
Do we do this for ourselves or do we do this for our patient?
Yeah, that's right.
And
I love it.
And we had this episode on no self. Once you see that essentially you don't really have a self, selfishness has no point anymore.
Yeah.
So might as well just be and do what is it that you do best, which is in this case to ask people whether they do want help or not.
Yeah. It's been such a joy for me when I'm working with patients, rather than to try to sell them on change, to show them what the status quo shows about them that's beautiful and awesome, and all the benefits of it, and to wonder with them, maybe this isn't something that you'd want to give up. Why would you want to change? And then it becomes the patient's job to sell me on change. And that leads to a peaceful, loving, powerful, healing experience. But the therapist's ego has to die. This is one of the 4 deaths of the therapist's ego. And this is the death of the codependent or helping ego.
And it's a form of ego that is insidious because we think of ego as narcissism, I'm the best.
Yeah.
But it's not that. It's that, I need to help. I'm aching to help.
Yes. That's beautiful the way you're putting that. And I still slip into it from time to time. And
me too.
When I think back on therapeutic failures that I've had, I can pinpoint my ego trying to be an expert, trying to help somebody, without looking at all the reasons maybe that they wouldn't want help and that they wouldn't want to change. It just blows my mind.
It's to satisfy my own discomfort.
Yeah. And also my wanting to impress somebody, to show them what an expert I am, and I've got the answer for you, and I'm going to help you, and I'll show you the way. And a lot of times patients will like that, and they'll buy into it, and you'll get addicted to it. But at least half of your patients are not going to like that.
Okay, so we have one last question here from Amanda.
Amanda, neat name.
And she says, I'm a psychologist from Spain, and I've been studying on your secrets of effective communication. I have a question regarding the disarming technique. More specifically, what happens afterwards? In the example you gave in one of your podcasts, a person who is feeling disheartened with regards to therapy and mentions that he or she feels she hasn't made any progress, was wondering what you might answer if, after using the secrets of effective communication successfully and getting closer, the patient asks, "So, doctor, you really think I've made no progress?" This seems tricky because I get the sense I would be stuck between a rock and a hard place here.
Well, it's a great question, Amanda. Thank you for sending it in, and I'm sure you'll have some great ideas on this one too. But all of the 5 secrets can be used effectively, and then you can just miss a little bit, and then they're going to be a big flop. Learning the 5 secrets is like learning to play a musical instrument. And if you work at it and practice and correct your errors, you can get really, really good at it. But let's say a patient says, "Oh, Dr. Burns, you're not helping, me. I'm not getting anywhere." A skillful use of the disarming technique might be something like, Amanda, let's pretend that Amanda's the patient. What you're saying is true. I've been thinking the same thing the last couple of sessions. I don't think I've done a good job. I haven't been understanding you. I haven't been helpful to you, and I can see that your depression score is not improving. Your anger score is not improving. And I can imagine that you're feeling discouraged and down and maybe even disappointed or angry with me. And I feel bad too because I really like you, and I'm convinced we can do some good work together. And in fact, the cool thing about what you're saying is I think this puts us on the same page, and let's talk about it. Tell me what I'm not helping you with, and the things that I've been saying and doing that aren't effective. I think this is the dialogue we need to have to get on get to working together in the way you want and the way I want. Now, it seems to me that response conveys hope. And the idea is we're going to use this failure to improve the therapy. But the therapist could so easily do this in an ineffective way, and the patient says, "Oh, Dr. Burns, you're not helping me."
But that's not what Amanda wrote. She said, "I am not making progress." So the patient is blaming himself or herself.
Yeah. So you want me to respond to the patient saying that I'm not making progress?
Yeah. So I was saying, well, doctor, I don't know. I must really not be a good patient. I'm not making any progress in this. And you're probably thinking I'm just the last of idiots. But I'm so down on myself for not getting better. Okay.
Now let's hear your 5 secrets response.
Well, that's where the disarming technique. I wouldn't use the disarming technique. I wouldn't say you're right.
Let's hear your response. The patient says, "I'm not making progress. I'm critical of myself." Right?
Yeah. Well, and I would go straight into empathy.
Yeah. Well, let's hear your response.
Yeah. So, Bill, you really sound like you're down on yourself. You're criticizing your progress, and I can imagine how disheartening that must feel for you. And you sound like it's increasing your depression. And I have to say that I feel my heart goes out to you for feeling this way, because I look at the work we've been doing, and boy, you're really putting all of your heart into this, and I can see how hard you're working, and I so enjoy working with you. I'd love to hear more about what type of things go through your mind when you're evaluating yourself. That would be one example of response.
That sounds really good. You're saying, Bill or whatever, Amanda, you're so down on yourself right now, and you must be feeling disheartened. And my heart goes out to you. You're working hard, and I enjoy working with you. I think those are really great things. I think I might want to add, these. The feeling of hopelessness is probably the worst symptom of depression, and I don't think I've ever had a patient who at some point in the therapy didn't feel hopeless or feel like they're not making progress, or they're not going to make progress, and kind of beating up on yourself because of that must feel so painful. And I have no doubt if we work together, you'll make a breakthrough. You're working so hard. I've never had a patient who worked hard who didn't eventually achieve the goal of joy and happiness and self-esteem. But let's talk about where we're stuck right now, and what are the things that aren't working for you. Maybe some things I've done or said that weren't helpful to you, or some problems that you're feeling kind of frustrated or even a bit angry about. I really want to hear what you have to say. This is vitally important. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. But I noticed that you didn't use the disarming technique.
Well, so if we want to say that, I would say, yeah, you're kind of stuck right now. I see your scores haven't been changing the last few weeks, and that's so common in depression, or so painful in depression. The hopelessness and the idea that you're stuck is probably the worst part of depression. How's that?
Well, that sounds like the thought empathy. You're phrasing back.
So you didn't think I agreed with him when I said it? You haven't made any progress in the last few weeks, and your scores aren't changing.
Well,
did that sound like disarming?
It sounded like you agreed with saying, okay, I hear you say that.
No, I would say here's the data right now on your score sheets, and we can see that your depression hasn't been improving at all in the last few weeks. So, what you're saying is very true.
Yeah, you could point to the facts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
so. So again, Amanda has a valid question there, which is, oh yeah, the doctor is actually telling me that I'm right and I'm not making any progress. I knew I was hopeless.
Yeah, well, if you agree in a dysfunctional way, certainly it will backfire. There's a difference between saying, yeah, you've been stuck in the last few weeks, and if we talk about it, we can find a path forward. But before we do that, tell me how awful this is for you, because I know the hopelessness is the worst part of the depression. And then once we've gotten on the same page together, let's see if we can move this baby forward. That's one way of doing it. But if you say, oh yes, you're making no progress and you're screwed, I mean that's a little different kind of therapeutic statement. The question is whether or not you're going to be including positive reframing and conveying it with a sense of warmth, a sense of compassion, and a sense that you do have something to offer. One of the problems in the treatment of depression is I call reverse hypnosis. It's where the patient convinces you, the therapist, that he or she really is hopeless and worthless. And I don't think I've ever had a patient where at the beginning of therapy I didn't come to that conclusion. Patients are very good at putting us into this hypnotic state of thinking, oh, wow, maybe this one really is a worthless person. Maybe this person really is hopeless. But if you buy into that, maybe you're buying into that a little, Amanda, then you're gonna get demoralized. But I never buy into that with a patient. I've never given up on a patient who's depressed and never will. And persistence has always led to therapeutic breakthroughs for my patient. And so I try to disarm the patient, acknowledge the nightmare that the patient is in, and yet at the same time provide compassion and hope.
Yeah.
Does that answer it? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the comment on the hypnosis that we're under, the reverse hypnosis, is something to keep mindful of, throughout the work with a patient, is to say, am I buying into what they're telling me? And is that impairing my ability to
and it's a powerful phenomenon. I don't think it's not talked about very much, but it happens in the treatment of depression. The patient hypnotizes you into believing they're really a hopeless, worthless person, and they're so good at it. And then when they recover, a few weeks later, you say, how could I have been believing that baloney? But they're really, really good at it, and it's not intentional either. We had a woman came to my clinic in Philadelphia that I might have mentioned to you. She said, I think I might really be a hopeless case. I've been depressed in London I've had 50 years of failed therapy. I've taken every known antidepressant. I've had 200 electroconvulsive therapies and 2 lobotomies.
Oh my God.
And I referred her to a colleague of mine. Oh my gosh, this is going to be too difficult. Yeah. And then I talked to Tony Bates, was his name. He was this charismatic Irish psychologist, really a nice guy. Yeah. And so I thought, well, this is a good case for Tony. And then I talked to him about 5 days later. I said, oh gosh, how are you doing with that woman from London? And he says, oh, fine. I said, she must be really difficult. And he says, what do you mean? I says, well, gosh, all the failed therapy and everything, how is she doing? He says, oh, she's recovered. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I just did the regular CBT thing. She's never had it. Worked like a charm. But it was so interesting.
He didn't let himself be hypnotized by her.
Yeah, well, he hadn't taken the history either.
Oh, okay.
I did the history, and then he just was going to do some treatment. But yeah, you get it with anxiety. The anxious patient hypnotizes you into believing they're too fragile for exposure. They shouldn't have to confront their fear. And if you buy into that, therapy's pretty doomed. Mm-hmm. And the patient with a relationship problem does the third form of reverse hypnosis, which is, I'm a victim, and my spouse is the perpetrator of all this bad stuff, and I'm good and he or she is bad. Mm-hmm. And if you buy into that, then the relationship therapy is pretty doomed. Is there a reverse hypnosis for a habit or addiction, Fabrice?
Well, it kind of probably goes about the same way, Doctor, well, I can't really stop, I'm just not focused enough. I can't concentrate on the task at hand.
Unless I have something to eat, or
unless I have something to eat, exactly. Or I shoot myself.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Well, that concludes our episode. Thank you, David.
Well, thank you, Steve and Sandy, Ren, Kevin, and Amanda, for those provocative, I would say, and exciting questions.
Yeah.
Got a little controversy going there.
Yeah, we did. Keep them going.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.